On Christmas night, I brought over my homemade banana bread, same recipe I've baked for 40 years. Marla, my daughter-in-law, looked at it and laughed. Oh, how quaint, poor people's dessert. My son didn't say a word, just kept chewing. I sat there, quiet, while they toasted champagne and passed the cranberry sauce right over me like I was air. But what they didn't know, that house they were eating in, I built it, paid for 80% of it, every brick, every board, every damn bolt. And the deed? It had my name. Still does. I just hadn't shown them yet. 3 days later, I stood across the courthouse steps and bought their house back with my own LLC, in cash. No announcements, no revenge speech, just papers, signed. And when they knocked on my door to beg for mercy, I served them banana bread, the same one they laughed at. This time, they didn't touch it. Want to know what I did next? Follow my story till the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I know how far the truth travels. The moment the front door opened, warmth spilled out, but not toward me. A gust of laughter from inside masked the sudden hush that followed my footsteps across the threshold. No one rushed over. No one noticed the gift bag swinging gently from my hand. The foyer smelled like cinnamon and pine, the same way it had every Christmas since Colby was little. But something else had changed. The family portrait wall used to greet visitors. I had hung those frames myself 20 years ago, spacing them evenly, leveling each one with pride. Now, in place of my photo with Martha at our 40th anniversary, there was a picture of Colby and Marla with Lila in matching plaid. My image was simply gone, as if I'd never been part of the story. I slipped off my coat and hung it without a word. No one offered to take it. "Lemuel," Marla said flatly as she passed by carrying a tray of deviled eggs. "You found the address all right?" I nodded. "Same house I helped frame from the studs up." She didn't respond. The sentence hung in the air, too detailed to be conversational, too true to be contested. Colby approached, glass of red in hand, cheeks already flushed. "Hey, Dad, glad you could make it." I studied his face. Same dimple as his mother, same habit of scratching behind the ear when nervous. "Thanks for the invite." He motioned toward the kitchen. "Food's out. Make yourself at home." That word, home, sat strange in my ears now. I was introduced to two of Marla's friends from her yoga group. They smiled politely, asked if I lived nearby. Marla cut in before I answered. "He rents a small place off Oakview," she said with a shrug. "Keeps things simple." There was a beat too long of silence before one of the women nodded and complimented the weather. As we moved into the dining room, the seats were mostly taken. Only a few remained, one of them at the far end of the table near the kitchen door, closest to the whir of the dishwasher. I glanced around. No one made room. I took the seat. Lila, sweet as always, patted over with a napkin and smiled. "Papa, you need one." Before I could thank her, Marla's voice snapped from across the table. "Honey, let Ruth handle it. Sit with the other kids." Lila froze, then obediently turned. I caught her eye and winked. She gave a small smile before disappearing. As the main dishes were served, Marla stood to toast. "Here's to another year of blessings, a warm home, good health, and finally, home ownership." She paused for emphasis. "Some people rent forever. I guess it's a choice." Laughter bubbled up around the table. Colby chuckled. I sipped my wine. From my seat, I could see into the living room. A projector cast a slideshow of family memories, vacations, birthdays, construction milestones. One photo showed the bare bones of this very house in its early days. Martha had taken that shot. I remembered the exact moment. I'd been standing to the right, covered in sawdust, smiling. The edge of my sleeve made the frame. My face did not. The meal continued. Chatter filled the space. I folded my napkin with slow deliberation. Each crease neat. Marla raised her voice slightly. "We're just lucky Colby's parents didn't burden us with anything, like debt." That drew another wave of laughter. I didn't speak, didn't clench my fists, just counted the folds. 3, 4. I stood up after dessert was served, though I hadn't touched mine. "Thank you for dinner," I said, nodding to no one in particular. Colby started to rise. "Dad, you don't have to." "I do," I interrupted gently. Only Ruth, the elderly neighbor, followed me to the door. "Good to see you, Lem," she said, patting my arm. I nodded. Likewise. Outside, the air had cooled. Snow gathered in the lawn corners. I paused on the sidewalk, turning to look at the house, lit with garlands, full of laughter, occupied by people who now wore my legacy like decor. I had built that house, every nail, every beam, but tonight, it belonged to those who'd forgotten the name etched beneath the foundation. The apartment felt colder than usual that morning, not from the December chill seeping through the windows, but from something quieter, sharper. Sunlight caught the edge of a picture frame on the shelf across from the kitchen. I reached for it out of habit. Colby and Marla's wedding. A day once so full of hope it could have lit the whole block. Only it didn't look quite the same anymore. The photo had been cropped. Not poorly, not maliciously, professionally, almost artful. Only half of my shoulder remained on the left side of the frame, like a phantom limb from a story they no longer wanted to tell. Martha's corsage still showed, but my face, the face that had wept at the back of the church, the face that signed the check that paid for it all, was gone. I set the frame down, not upright, face down. The apartment clock ticked like a metronome above the stove. I stared at my phone, thumb hovering over the call button. It rang twice. No answer. I waited a minute, dialed again. Voicemail. On the third try, a message popped up instead. "Hope you got home okay. Let's not make things bigger than they are." Bigger than they are. I put on my coat, grabbed my keys, and walked to the cafe 3 blocks over, a small place called Theo's that still made coffee the way my father liked it, black. No apologies. On the way, I passed the park, same cracked sidewalk where I taught Colby to balance on 2 wheels. Back then, his knees were scabbed and his eyes fierce with determination. He'd fallen 7 times, and I'd told him, "You're not failing, son. You're learning to ride with scars." Now, people walked by without nodding. A man pushing a stroller glanced my way, then looked through me. At Theo's, I sat alone by the window. No one joined. No one interrupted. Just coffee and quiet. Later that day, I found myself standing at the kitchen counter again, phone in hand. The memory that returned wasn't one of houses or holidays, but of Colby, maybe 10 years old, throwing himself in front of a classmate who'd called me names at a PTA meeting. "That's my dad," he'd shouted. "Don't talk about him like that." His fists weren't strong, but his voice had been, and that day, he'd made me feel 10 feet tall. Last night, he'd sat quietly as Marla said I was a burden. Sometimes, silence is louder than betrayal. By evening, I called again. The phone rang longer this time, before connecting. "Dad?" Colby answered. His voice was rushed, clipped. "Kayla didn't mean anything. You know how she is." I let the pause hang. "And you?" I said slowly. "Do you know how I am?" Click. The line went dead. I didn't call back. Night had fallen fully when I left the apartment and walked 2 miles to Ridgefield Drive. Their house glowed warmly in the dark. Wreath on the door, candles in the windows, a holiday postcard brought to life. I didn't knock, just stood across the street under a broken street lamp, watching. The chair I'd sat in the night before, near the kitchen, out of sight but still part of the table, was gone. Not just unoccupied, removed, inside. Colby passed a bowl to Marla, who laughed and touched his arm. Lila ran by in a red dress, trailing ribbon. I didn't belong there anymore. Maybe I never had. Back home, I went to the bedroom, opened the drawer I hadn't touched in months, and removed a folder marked in my late wife's handwriting. Loan documents, Ridgefield property. I set it on the table, unopened, fingers resting on the corner. If they won't speak truth, I whispered, maybe paper will. The folder sat where I'd left it. Same angle, same crease on the edge, but heavier now, not in weight. Paper doesn't change overnight, but in meaning. I lifted the flap like I was opening a casket. Inside were decades compressed into documents, receipts, blueprint copies, a home construction ledger still faintly smelling of the contractor's glue I once used with bare hands. Martha had kept everything, neatly filed and labeled in her cursive. She'd always believed memory needed paper. The ledger's columns blurred for a moment before I adjusted my reading glasses. 80% of the home's construction costs were logged under one name. Mine. Labor, foundation materials, roof trusses, even the custom oak cabinets Marla now pretended she chose, paid from my account, my name, not theirs. Not on the deed, but in every number that built the place. I needed confirmation, something living. I picked up my phone and scrolled until I found the number. Howard Moser, answered a voice I hadn't heard in years, still had the gruffness of concrete dust in it. Howard. Lemuel. Lem, I'll be damned. Haven't heard your voice since Martha's service. You okay? I have a question, I said. About Ridgefield. A beat of silence. Then, you mean the house you basically built? You remember it that way? I remember Kayla saying it'd be cleaner if only Colby's name went on the paperwork, said joint ownership would complicate optics or something. You told me it didn't matter, that building it was your real signature. It did matter, I whispered. Howard didn't reply. He didn't need to. I hung up and left for the storage unit. The air inside the facility smelled like old cardboard and something metallic. I passed rows of untouched lives until I reached Unit 34B. My key slid in without hesitation, as if it too remembered why it was there. The drill was in a clear plastic crate beneath a sheet marked Workshop Lem. I knelt beside it. The orange casing had faded, but the weight felt the same in my hand. My palm curled around the grip as if I were 15 years younger. The first time I used it on Ridgefield's joists, it had bucked in my hand and split my knuckle. I hadn't even flinched. That house had deserved my blood. A flash came unbidden. Colby at 14, lanky and unsure, watching me measure drywall. Why not let them hire someone? He'd asked, voice cracking. Because this house is my gift to you, I had said. And you don't outsource a gift. That was the first time he helped me drill a stud. The lines weren't perfectly aligned, but I let them stay. I wanted him to see the value in trying, not just in perfection. Now those lines were covered in drywall, paint, and pretense. Back at the apartment, I unfolded the blueprint copies and invoices onto the dining table, one by one, until they formed a mosaic of proof. They had removed my name from the deed, but not from history. I wrote that sentence down in my notebook, folded the receipts, labeled the envelope, in case I forget. Then I walked to a notary's office near City Hall. The receptionist looked surprised when I mentioned I wasn't there for new paperwork, but to verify something old. 10 minutes later, I had it. A clause buried in South Carolina's real property statutes. If one party pays over 75% of a property's cost and isn't legally credited, they can contest asset claims under inheritance review, even post-transfer, a loophole, rare, real. I thanked the notary and walked out into the fading afternoon light. They forgot who built their roof, I murmured. I'm about to remind them. That night, I opened the laptop Martha had insisted I keep updated, even after she passed. It took a moment to boot up. In the search bar, I typed, Create LLC in South Carolina. The bank hadn't changed much. Same scuffed linoleum floor. Same stale scent of paper and toner. Even the ficus plant in the lobby corner looked identical to how it did 10 years ago when I came in with Martha to set up her final savings account. Wesley met me at the side office, the one tucked behind the main desk, but not entirely private. He had gray at the temples now, and his tie was slightly askew, like always. Lem, he said warmly, but there was hesitation behind the smile. It's been a while. I nodded. Need your help? Quietly. He gestured for me to sit. Of course. What's going on? I need to verify ownership status on a property, Ridgefield Drive, my old place. Wesley typed into the system with the precision of someone who'd been behind that desk too long. Okay, Ridgefield. All right. Looks like the house was refinanced last year. He hesitated. And? New deed was filed as part of the refinance. The current listed owners are Colby West and Marla West. No pause. No, with Lemuel as co-signer. Just names. 2 of them. I didn't say anything. My hand flexed against my knee under the table. I'm sorry, Wesley added gently. It doesn't show you on record anymore. Can I get a copy of that? My voice came out low, steady. Of course. He hit a few keys, then walked to the back printer. When he returned, I took the page without a word. My name wasn't there, not in ink, not in initials, not even in the margins. Outside. The winter air bit at my collar as I stood in the parking lot holding the printout. The sunlight caught the watermark on the paper like it was proud of what it erased. No signature, no thank you, not a trace of me. I didn't drive home right away, just sat in the truck, staring at the folded page on the passenger seat. My hands felt stiff from more than the cold. Back at the apartment, I stared at the phone, then dialed, straight to voicemail. I waited an hour, then texted. I visited the bank. Let's talk when you can. Hours passed, nothing. Then finally, a reply. Dad, not now. Please drop this. The words landed harder than any slam of a door. They had dropped me. Neatly, quietly, like an outdated appliance. I walked to the hallway closet and pulled down a small lockbox. Inside were receipts, dozens of them, payment stubs, bank transfers, invoices for lumber, appliances, even Martha's favorite pendant lights above the kitchen island. Each one bore my name. I turned over one slip, tile work from 2004, and scribbled on the back in sharp pen. They removed me from the records, but not from the bricks. The box stayed open on the table as I sat down and stared at the phone again. Then I opened my contacts list, scrolled to Colby's name, and pressed delete. Gone. No beep, no warning, just gone. If they wouldn't see me as family, they'd see me as something else. I opened the laptop again. This time, I didn't just search, I acted. The South Carolina Secretary of State website loaded slowly, like it knew what I was about to do mattered. I clicked, Start a Business. The voicemail came just after sunrise. Howard's voice crackled like old wood. You didn't hear this from me, Lem, but I think your son's house is being quietly prepped for a buyer. They want it gone fast. No greetings, no pleasantries, just that. I stared at my half-drunk cup of coffee. It had gone lukewarm, bitter. I didn't bother heating it again. Later that morning, I met Howard at Carly's Diner downtown. The place smelled like burnt toast and too many secrets. He slid into the booth like he'd been carrying the news in his coat pocket all night. I called in a favor, he said. Friend in real estate circles. Said Colby and Marla have been talking to a private agent. Pocket listing. Avoiding foreclosure headlines, I said. He nodded. They're desperate. Lem, they want a clean break. Move fast. No noise. I didn't answer right away, just pulled out an old checkbook from my coat. Flipped through carbon copies, yellowed and smudged with time, kitchen cabinets, driveway pour, insulation, page after page, line after line. These pages built the very walls they now wish to sell off like used furniture, I said, more to myself than him. Howard didn't argue. That evening, I walked past Ridgefield again. The winter wind had stripped most of the holiday decorations. A small for sale sign was half hidden in the bushes, white letters on black plastic, discreet, intentional. Selling the house is one thing, I muttered. Selling your soul is another. I stood on the sidewalk longer than I meant to, watched the light flicker behind the front window, where the Christmas tree still stood. A shadow passed. It might have been Colby. I didn't stay to find out. Back home, I pulled out a small notebook from the drawer. In the margin of a blank page, I wrote down something he'd once said when he was 17. "Someday this will all be ours." He'd said it with such certainty, standing in the garage beside me. We'd just finished sealing the concrete floor. His sneakers still had gray flecks on them. Now, staring at the same page, I replied in silence, "You can't inherit what you never honored." That night, I opened the folder labeled Phase 1. The LLC forms I'd downloaded the night before were waiting. I printed each page, initials and signatures carefully added in black ink. LLC, name, West Lantern Holdings, registered agent, Lemuel Tate. It wasn't a threat, it was clarity. If they wanted a buyer, they were about to get one, just not the one they planned for. I scanned the signed documents into a new digital folder and named it Phase 1, Take Back. The cursor blinked once, twice, then the screen refreshed. Congratulations! West Lantern Holdings LLC has been successfully registered in the state of South Carolina. Just like that, I became something else, on paper, at least. The form asked if I wanted to designate a business purpose. I typed, property investment and restoration, then paused. Added a second line, reclamation of legacy. Under registered agent, Lemuel Tate, no initials, no hiding. Lanterns don't shout, they shine. I closed the laptop and walked to the bedroom, pulled the old wooden step stool from the closet and reached for the top shelf, where Martha used to keep her sewing kit and Christmas cards. Behind those, a small gray safe blinked at me with its digital lock. Code still worked. Our wedding date. Inside, an envelope she had labeled in her neat handwriting, just in case fund. Inside were 10 cashier's checks, folded with the same precision as Martha's hospital corners on our bed. Alongside them, a stack of Series EE savings bonds, untouched since 2008. Total, just over $82,000. I'd saved this for a time when everything might collapse, I whispered. I just didn't know it'd be my family. I carried the envelope with both hands, like an heirloom, to the bank downtown. The teller looked up as I approached the business desk. "How can I help today?" "I'd like to open a business account," I said. "West Lantern Holdings." The manager was called, ID verified, forms filled, the funds deposited without a hitch. When they offered to set up online banking, I declined. "I prefer to walk into things," I said. Before leaving, I requested a certified bank letter, proof of funds on record, notarized, signed, stamped. I left with a folder under my arm and a quiet smile on my face. As I returned home, Ruth was watering her porch plants, bundled in a blue fleece and her usual curiosity. "Everything all right, Lem?" she asked, eyeing the folder. "I've just legally become someone they'll soon regret underestimating," I replied. She blinked, then chuckled softly. "Well, it's about time." Inside, I sat at the kitchen table and opened a blank document on my laptop. Title: Intent to participate in real property acquisition, Ridgefield Drive. The body was simple. I expressed interest in submitting an offer through a representative. I named no names, provided only contact via a business P.O. box and email. At the bottom, I signed LT, Managing Member, West Lantern Holdings. No need to knock on doors. Paper spoke just fine. I printed the document, slipped it into an envelope, and marked it confidential, buyer inquiry. It would reach the real estate intermediary within the week. By then, they'd already have my credentials on file. That night, I scheduled a call with a real estate lawyer. No names, just an anonymous property rights inquiry. I knew I wasn't the first father erased from a deed, but I intended to be one of the few who wrote his way back in. I pulled out a clean folder and labeled it in all caps. Offer packet, Ridgefield House. No need to yell, I'd already signed my presence into the deal. The envelope had no return address. Its edges were creased, like someone had held it too long before letting it go. I found it wedged between a catalog for window blinds and a coupon packet I'd never use. The handwriting on the front was familiar, Ruth's, precise but gentle. Inside, one sentence stood on the first line. No salutation. I saw what they did. Below that, I remember who really built that house. You have every right to hold your ground. No signature, but no need. The truth doesn't need signatures when it's already known. Back inside, I held the envelope for a moment before setting it beside my coffee. Then, drawn by a gravity I hadn't felt in years, I walked to the nightstand and pulled out the bottom drawer. At the very back, beneath a bundle of old receipts and insurance forms, was Martha's journal. Faded blue fabric cover, the corners worn, a dried petal tucked between the last two pages. I opened it. On the first page, in her looping script, Colby's first steps were on these wooden floors. You laid them with your own hands. I sat down slowly. My fingers rested on the ink like it still held warmth. Memory took over before I could stop it. Martha and I had worked on the Ridgefield house in the evenings, after my shift ended. The porch had taken weeks. It was her favorite part. She'd insisted on the lanterns, the handrails carved from reclaimed pine. "Don't just build walls, Lem," she said one night, paint in her hair. "Build love into them." She was always better with words. I closed the journal and let the silence stretch. Not grief, not now, something different, like applause from a ghost, quiet, approving. The journal rested in my lap as I underlined a passage on the 5th page. "This house will outlive us. Let it carry who we were." I tapped the cover twice, like a heartbeat, then rose. At my desk, I typed out a new letter. Simple. Professional, to whom it may concern. This letter expresses my intent, as managing member of West Lantern Holdings, LLC, to submit a formal offer for the property located at Ridgefield Drive. Attached, proof of funds and legal formation documentation. Please consider this correspondence as an official inquiry in good faith. I signed it, LT, Managing Member, West Lantern Holdings. I emailed it to the intermediary's confidential inbox. Then opened my calendar and marked January 2nd, first bid phase. No fanfare, no announcement, just action. If they buried me in silence, I whispered, I'll rise in paperwork. Before bed, I returned to Martha's journal and added a line at the bottom of the page I'd underlined earlier. They're about to remember who laid the foundation, literally. The courthouse steps were cold, but not colder than their Christmas silence. I wore gray, not for mourning, not for celebration, just enough to blend in. No tie, no flourish. This wasn't personal, not to anyone watching, but inside, it was the most personal thing I'd ever done. A man in a navy overcoat nodded at me, mistaking me for another investor. I nodded back. Let them see what they wanted. I wasn't there as their father. I was there as West Lantern Holdings. At 9:58 a.m., the auctioneer stepped onto the top stair with a clipboard and a small stack of paper. "We'll begin with parcel 2247 Ridgefield Drive," he called out. I knew that number better than my own street address. I built it, brick by burden. Opening bid is $340,000, the man said. One hand raised almost immediately. $340, a voice confirmed. I raised mine. $345. A younger man in a sharp wool coat lifted his chin. $350. The auctioneer looked around. No one else moved. I counted to 3. $355, I said. The man lowered his clipboard. Fair warning. $355 once. Twice. Sold to West Lantern Holdings. The words felt like a reckoning. The other man shook his head and walked off. I remained in place. Steady. No smile, no reaction, just the sound of my breath and a pen scratching across documents as I signed the official paperwork. I now owned the house they said I could never afford. From across the street, near the courthouse entrance, I saw Colby. He was talking to someone, half listening, occasionally glancing toward the steps. I didn't wave, didn't walk over. He didn't know, and I didn't need him to, yet. I turned back toward the steps and recalled the words Marla had offered with her wine glass held high, weeks earlier. "He's a renter, never built anything lasting," I whispered, quiet enough for the winter air to carry it away. "I just bought the thing you claimed I never could, with cash, with silence, with every receipt you forgot." The auctioneer handed me the title deed. My name, not as father, but as managing member. I walked back to my car and drove home without music. At the apartment, I opened the drawer beside my bed. Inside, Martha's journal waited. Next to it, I placed the Ridgefield title deed. It wasn't vengeance. It was ownership of my name, my dignity, and the walls I laid by hand. That evening, as I reheated soup, my phone buzzed. Voicemail from Colby. "Dad, something happened at the auction. Can we talk?" The knock came at 6:48 p.m. Sharp, measured, not rushed, but not confident either. Through the peephole, I saw them, Colby and Marla, both standing closer together than they probably had in weeks. His hands were in his coat pockets. Hers were gripping a manila folder tight enough to crinkle the corners. I opened the door without a word, no invitation spoken, but I stepped aside. Old habits don't die. They just wait at the threshold. They sat on the couch. The same one they'd never bothered to use before. Always too busy, too important, or too preoccupied with their schedule to drop by. Colby looked around the apartment as if it had grown a second bedroom since he last visited. Marla stared at the folder in her lap like it held her voice. Finally, he started. "Dad, we didn't know. We didn't realize it was you." I sat across from them. The silence between us had more weight than any insult ever thrown. "I see," I said. Marla leaned forward, her voice thin but rehearsed. "We're asking, just for a little time, if there's anything you can do to pause the process. We just need a window." I stood, walked to the kitchen without a word. The linoleum creaked beneath my steps. In the refrigerator sat a foil-wrapped loaf. I hadn't planned to bring it out tonight. I'd made it 2 nights ago, more out of memory than hunger. The recipe was old, older than their marriage, older than their mockery. I unwrapped the foil and placed the banana bread on a plate. When I returned, I set it gently on the coffee table between us. No one reached for it. They recognized it. She recognized it, the same dessert she once laughed about at Thanksgiving, whispering to her friends. Bless his heart, he still bakes like we're in the Depression. And now it was here, not as dessert, but as dignity. I didn't sit back down. I stood behind my chair. "You insulted me before strangers," I said, voice steady. "Now you ask help from a stranger." Marla looked down. Colby stared at the bread. I continued. "I am no longer your father in this matter. You'll have a meeting with West Lantern Holdings. They make the decisions now." She blinked fast, then nodded once. The folder she held slid slightly from her lap, as if its weight had shifted. No more protests, no dramatic appeals, just silence, finally earned. They stood, said thank you, but not to me. To the space, maybe. To the idea that the door had even opened. I watched from the window as they walked to the car. No umbrella, no hand-holding, just the two of them and a cold January wind. I looked at the bread, still untouched, the night I was humiliated. They laughed over dessert. Tonight, they wept in the presence of the same bread. Back at the kitchen table, I opened my calendar, typed January 4th, 3:00 p.m., Colby Marla, West Lantern Holdings. The room was colder than expected, not in temperature, but in tone. The frosted windows of the legal office let in a dim gray light, casting quiet shadows on the glossy conference table. I sat at the head of it, wearing the same gray suit from the courthouse auction. To my right was a manila folder, to my left, a red one. Colby and Marla walked in together, their steps hesitant, They didn't ask for a hug, didn't greet with "Dad," just a nod. A legal assistant closed the door behind them and remained outside. This was a closed-door meeting with the father they didn't think they needed. "Thank you for coming," I said, voice neutral, the way I used to speak in client negotiations. "Today, you're not here with family. You're here with West Lantern Holdings." They both froze. I reached into the manila folder and slowly withdrew the original deed. I laid it on the table, gently turned it so it faced them. Colby leaned forward, eyes darting. That's our—" I didn't let him finish. "This house never left me," I said. "You just stopped looking for my name." His lips parted, but no sound came. Marla's hands trembled slightly in her lap. I pulled out the second folder, thicker, worn at the edges, blueprints, copies of checks, handwritten notes, old photos, all dated, all labeled. I slid the folder open like a magician laying down the final card. One photo, yellowed and slightly bent, showed me on a ladder, hammer in hand, framing the living room wall. Colby whispered, "You kept all of it." I didn't answer. Instead, I slid across a fresh sheet of paper, printed neatly and clipped at the top. Marla picked it up and read aloud softly. "Integrity test. How do you rebuild after betrayal?" She looked at me, confused. "I'm offering you both something more valuable than time," I said. "A chance. One chance to rebuild, not just finances, but who you are." Marla blinked. "Is this real?" "As real as what you did to me," I said calmly. "You'll have 90 days, I continued. "Rent-free. Live in that house. Think about the choices that brought you here. Then, it's no longer yours. But your name? That's up to you." They sat in silence. Marla began to cry quietly. Colby kept his eyes locked on the document in his hands. Before leaving, I opened the red folder, removed a single sheet, and slid it toward Marla. It was a copy of the deed, my name still bold on the title line. On the corner, a sticky note read, "I built this for you once. You destroyed it. Let's see what you do now." No further words were needed. I stood and walked out of the room, not looking back. Outside, the wind bit through my coat, but it felt different this time. The keys to Ridgefield sat heavy in my pocket, not as a burden, but as a reminder. They had called me poor on Christmas. Today, I left with my name, my dignity, and the one thing they couldn't erase, truth. The air inside Ridgefield felt unfamiliar in its quiet. The walls hadn't changed, but the energy had. Less ownership, more reverence, less entitlement, more caution. Colby and Marla stood in the living room, not like residents, but like people waiting for a verdict. I didn't offer coffee, just paper. I placed the folder on the kitchen island and opened it. 3 months, I said plainly. Temporary occupancy under West Lantern Holdings. Marla reached out first, reading with care. Colby hovered behind, glancing at the clauses. "No parties," I said, pointing. "No guests beyond immediate family. Monthly logs of volunteer hours. And Lila stays enrolled in the local school. No disruption." Colby's jaw tightened slightly. Marla nodded. "This is a contract for character," I added. "Not rent." I left the papers with them and walked out. If they signed, they could stay. If not, the house would wait for someone new. The first month passed without ceremony. Marla took a part-time job at the grocery store, restocking shelves late into the night. I saw her once from my truck, fumbling with boxes in the back dock. She didn't notice me. Colby showed up twice a week at the community kitchen downtown. Ruth mentioned she saw him handing out trays, wearing an apron too small for his frame. He didn't smile much, but he came. I didn't interfere, didn't praise, didn't judge. I watched. At Ruth's porch, over tea, she murmured, "They're trying, not perfectly, but differently." I sipped and answered, Sometimes silence makes the loudest mentor. One morning, with no announcement, I walked the hallway of Ridgefield. The picture frames along the wall still told the story of a family, one carefully edited over the years. My face had been cropped from the wedding photo that once hung by the stairs. It had always bothered Martha. She noticed before I did. That day, I removed the old frame and replaced it with a copy I'd kept. One where I stood tall, one hand resting on Colby's shoulder, still smiling, still naive, but present. I didn't mention it, didn't hang it askew for drama, just level. Exact. I waited to see if they'd notice. At the end of the month, a knock came. Marla stood at the door, holding a tray, roasted chicken, some steamed vegetables, 2 biscuits, nothing extravagant. I thought maybe you hadn't cooked, she said. I let her in. She placed the tray on the table. Didn't sit, didn't speak more than necessary. Before turning to leave, she said quietly, "For what it's worth, thank you for the chance." I nodded. She left. No apologies, no big gestures. Just the kind of quiet that means maybe someone's thinking for the first time in a long time. Later that night, I opened Martha's journal, turned to the back, found a clean page. I wrote, 1 month down, 2 to go. Let's see what's built, not with bricks, but with humility. The contract had no flair, no bow, no celebration, just paper, ink, and 3 months of silence exchanged for a kind of understanding. I stood outside Ridgefield, its porch light off in the midday sun. The house looked cleaner, more still. Maybe it was the absence of voices, or maybe it was presence of something else. Growth, perhaps, even if slow. Colby walked out first, keys in hand. He didn't meet my eyes, just held them out. I took them. No speeches, no closure, just a nod between men who now understood that titles mean less than time spent. Back home, I opened a drawer I hadn't touched in years. Beneath old tax files and photo negatives was a sealed envelope, Martha's handwriting, in case they ever come back. I held my breath and opened it. Lemuel, if they return, remind them who you are, but never forget who they can still become. M. My hand trembled, but not from age, just from love stored too long. That night, I didn't burn the past. I filed it. The deed to Ridgefield, legally mine, sat between 2 new documents, a trust account and an inheritance clause. Beneficiary, Lila West, sole granddaughter. No joint names, no loopholes. The house would be hers one day, if not by bloodline, then by the only thing that truly mattered, resilience. A week later, I sat on a wooden bench near the playground at Lila's school, children scattered like sparrows. She spotted me from the stairs and ran like she'd never stopped trusting me. She hugged me hard, breathless. "Grandpa," I smiled. "I said I would. Didn't I?" She dug into her backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper, colorful edges peeking from between the creases. Inside was a drawing, me in front of Ridgefield House, wearing a red cape. Beneath it, in shaky handwriting, "Grandpa, you're my superhero. You saved the house, you saved my mom and dad, you saved me." I didn't cry, not then, but something lifted, like a roof that never quite belonged to me until now. That evening, I lit a candle beside Martha's photo. No grand declarations, no vengeance speeches, just one sentence. The house wasn't the inheritance, and I meant it. At the lawyer's office, I signed the final set of documents. Trustee, Lemuel Tate. Beneficiary, Lila West. Title of legal packet. In the name of dignity. The ink bled slightly on the final signature. My hand didn't shake, but the pen knew this wasn't just business. We teach by what we endure, but we lead by how we rise after it.